A soft drizzle misted the cobblestone lanes of Grey Castle, an ancient city known for its towering spires and centuries-old traditions woven into every corner of its high walls. Over the generations, visitors to Grey Castle had marveled at its mosaic of ivy-clad turrets, marble-paved courtyards, and painstakingly carved statues presiding over arched doorways. Yet beyond the city's serene facade lay a bustling hub of power and intrigue. A grand palace crowned the city's northern district, its vast courtyards secured by the unyielding vigilance of an elite battalion called the Ruby Sentinels. Among their ranks was a stalwart guard named Winston Waterford, born to a family of modest means, but fortified with unshakable devotion to duty and a heart fiercely loyal to the principles enshrined in Grey Castle's royal codes. Winston's discipline and sharp eye were instantly apparent. He stood at attention near the palace's main entrance, wearing the iconic deep crimson tunic and polished black boots that marked him as a member of the Ruby Sentinels. Although only in his mid-20s, he had already earned the respect of his peers through his calm temperament, impeccable training, and sincere respect for the vow he had taken. He had patrolled in biting snowstorms and scorching summers, responding to every call with the same unwavering composure. The late afternoon drizzle that day added a gentle sheen to the courtyard flagstones, as if nature itself were trying to cleanse the palace grounds in anticipation of what would become an extraordinary confrontation. In the heart of the bustling courtyard, sunlight attempted to pierce the gathering clouds, illuminating the animated clusters of people who had come to petition the crown, seek audiences with high ministers, or simply gaze upon the palace's splendor. Merchants dressed in colorful attire haggled amiably with each other in the corner of the courtyard, hoping to peddle their delicate jewelry or foreign textiles. Wealthy men and women hurried along, their retinues in tow, golden accessories clinking with each step. Occasionally, foreign dignitaries from far-flung kingdoms made their appearances, their exotic robes drawing wide-eyed stares from locals. Yet no matter their rank or purpose, they all, in one way or another, passed through the watchful gaze of Winston and his fellow guards. The commotion reached a crescendo when an ostentatious carriage appeared at the palace's iron gates, a regal vehicle with dark lacquered wood, gilded flourishes, and curtains of embroidered velvet. Its wheels, bound with gleaming brass fittings, drew the eye of every passerby. The coachman guided his horses forward at a measured pace, commanding them with an air of careful pride. The entire scene exuded a kind of rehearsed grandeur, as though announcing to everyone, "A member of high nobility has arrived." Only the most privileged families could afford such a lavish carriage, and Winston readied himself for the arrival of an important guest. When the carriage halted, a young man stepped out. He wore a fitted frock coat tailored from fine black wool, with intricate silver stitching along the lapels. A cluster of precious stones adorned the coat's buttons, reflecting the waning sunlight in bright, distracting flecks. He was tall and slender, his hair a deep auburn that fell across his forehead in meticulously styled waves. His gaze swept the courtyard like a disinterested sovereign surveying his realm. This was Donovan Harding Clark, newly arrived from a province rumored to be flush with wealth. Whispers had circulated in Grey Castle about the Harding Clark family's meteoric rise. Some speculated their fortune came from shrewd mercantile maneuvers, others suspected underhanded deals and questionable alliances. It took mere seconds for Donovan to spot Winston standing guard. Rather than offer even the slightest courtesy, Donovan advanced, letting his boots strike the stone walkway with a deliberate assertiveness. The hush that fell among onlookers signaled the tension coiling around the moment. Winston greeted him with the standard custom, a respectful bow of the head and a calm statement, "My lord, welcome to the palace. May I request to see your invitation or writ of royal summons?" Donovan stiffened, as though personally affronted by the guard's mere presence. In a voice dripping with superiority, he drawled, "Are you a new recruit, or have the palace standards fallen so low that any common man can hold a spear?" Winston maintained an outward placidity, though inside he felt an uneasy ripple. Still, he had been trained not to take such insults personally. "I've served in the Ruby Sentinels for several years, my lord," he replied evenly. "All visitors must present official documentation before being admitted through the gates. That is the rule for everyone, regardless of station." Donovan's lip curled in a faint sneer. He was clearly unused to being challenged. He let out a dismissive laugh and held up a hand, signaling his accompanying footman to produce a sealed parchment. Still, his haughty manner remained unshaken. "There. Satisfied?" Now stand aside. I have pressing matters and have no time to dally with underlings. Winston accepted the parchment, quickly scanning the official seal. Everything appeared legitimate. Nonetheless, he felt the weight of Donovan's glare upon him, a glare that hinted at contempt for anyone he deemed of lower status. With the protocol satisfied, Winston inclined his head and stepped aside. "Thank you for your cooperation, my lord," he said, gesturing for Donovan to proceed. Donovan paused only to favor Winston with a parting remark, pitched just loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "Don't grow too accustomed to this post. It might not last if the palace decides it wants an actual professional at its doors." And with that, he strode inside, leaving behind a palpable current of tension. The bystanders, who had witnessed the exchange, cast curious glances in Winston's direction. One of the older palace staff, a steward named Bartholomew Longvale, sidled up to him. "You handled that well," he commented in a low voice. "Still, watch yourself with that one. We've heard troubling things about the Harding Clarks. Nasty business, that fortune they've built. Word is they've left a trail of trampled folk behind them." Winston offered a faint nod of acknowledgement. He would not let Donovan's cutting words deter him from his sworn duty. The day continued, and Winston resumed his watch, though he felt an unsettled pang, a sense that Donovan would not be content to limit his hostility to a single biting remark. In the days that followed, Donovan became an object of fascination in Grey Castle. He took up residence in a lavish estate just beyond the palace walls. Curious nobles invited him to gatherings, dinners, and exclusive soirees, eager to curry favor with a young man from a reputedly powerful line. At each event, Donovan made sure to boast of his ancestry, hint at the sheer size of his family's coffers, and hint at possibly investing in new ventures for those who flattered him best. A circle of sycophants soon collected around him, for certain lords and ladies sniffed at the potential for personal gain. Yet not all were charmed. Observers with a keen sense of character saw beyond the polished facade. There were rumors, swirling in taverns and whispered in the corridors of lesser-known estates, about how Donovan had once bullied a minor noble at a countryside assembly, how his father had manipulated a shipping contract in the far eastern port city, leaving local merchants bankrupt and desperate. Wherever Donovan went, he seemed to trail a faint whiff of scandal. In Grey Castle's palace, however, none dared openly confront such a figure, at least not without clear cause. The Ruby Sentinels maintained rigorous protocol, priding themselves on courtesy and impartiality. Winston, for his part, rarely crossed paths with Donovan in that first week, but on the few occasions he did, the young noble would bestow an exaggerated smirk, as though silently mocking Winston's position at the gate. Winston maintained an unreadable expression, determined never to yield to provocation. That all changed one morning when the palace prepared for the arrival of an esteemed envoy from a neighboring kingdom. Carriages carrying foreign dignitaries rattled through the gates, banners of bright colors flapping overhead. Winston and his fellow guards sprang into action, diligently verifying each visitor's credentials. The courtyard rang with lively chatter and the stamping of horses, while footmen unloaded trunks of gifts meant for the crown. Amidst the bustle, Donovan materialized at the palace entrance, flanked by two associates who seemed more like personal sycophants than true companions. In full earshot of the newly arriving dignitaries, Donovan exclaimed loudly, "The Grand Guard of Grey Castle hard at work, checking their little pieces of parchment. How quaint." Then, as if Winston were a piece of scenery, Donovan fixed him with a sardonic stare. "I suppose you'll demand I show my documents again, will you?" Winston, ignoring the condescending barbs, gave a professional bow. "Greetings once more, my lord. We're verifying every arrival today as a security measure for the delegates' peace of mind. If you wish to enter, you need only present your credentials." Donovan's two hangers-on exchanged amused smiles. One, a man in a slightly ill-fitting waistcoat, gave a theatrical sigh of exasperation. The other, a woman with elaborate curls pinned high, giggled behind a gloved hand. Donovan smirked. "Surely the palace has records that I'm staying in the city? Must we repeat these pointless steps?" Captain Eamon Whitehall, the lead officer overseeing arrivals, stepped forward, having witnessed the exchange. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with silvered hair and kind but discerning eyes. His voice conveyed calm authority. "My lord, today's an occasion of heightened protocol. Each guest must be checked, no matter their rank. Ensures the safety of our foreign friends as well as our own citizens." Donovan sized up Captain Whitehall, clearly deciding how far he could push the issue. At length, He reached inside his cloak pocket, produced the necessary invitation, and slapped it into the captain's hand. The entire gesture reeked of contempt, but the captain refrained from reacting. He simply confirmed the authenticity of the document and returned it. Satisfied, Donovan stalked forward, muttering just loudly enough for Winston to catch, "I truly wonder where they find these guards. Next time, they should at least ensure they can read properly." A flicker of annoyance passed across Winston's face, but he remained silent. Donovan and his entourage swept into the palace, disappearing behind a set of gilded doors, leaving behind a small crowd of onlookers disturbed by the tension that hovered in the air. Within the palace's ornate halls, the foreign dignitaries were greeted with harp music, elegantly laid tables of refreshments, and corridors lined with tapestries depicting Grey Castle's noble past. Donovan roamed among the visitors, reveling in the luxury. He made sure to introduce himself to key individuals, counselors, ambassadors, merchants of note, always careful to drop mentions of his father's successful ventures. And with each exchange, he displayed a veneer of suave confidence, charming many who were not yet attuned to the darker undertones of his personality. At one point, Donovan joined a gathering in the great reception hall, a chamber dominated by towering columns and lit by chandeliers teeming with candles. Lord Bertram Montfort, an established figure in Grey Castle's court, was conversing with Sir Laurent, an emissary from the distant province of Tarandel, and Lady Avellini Renford, a noblewoman reputed for her philanthropic work. Donovan interjected, complimenting Lady Avellini on her pearls and praising Sir Laurent's commanding presence. His well-practiced flattery had the desired effect, drawing their attention. Soon the conversation shifted toward Donovan's origins. Lady Avellini inquired politely, "Your accent suggests you're from across the western plains, my lord. Do tell us of your domain. Your carriage, I must say, is quite breathtaking." Donovan sipped a goblet of spiced wine, savoring the moment. "Indeed, Lady Avellini, my family oversees substantial lands near the Silver Lake region. My father's shipping enterprise and our connections to resource trade have catapulted us to prominence." He made a sweeping gesture as though bestowing some philanthropic boon. "We deal in precious minerals, textiles, and, shall we say, more exclusive commodities." Lord Bertram's eyes flickered with interest. "Exclusive commodities," he pressed gently. Donovan's smirk held a glint of mischief. "I've discovered that in certain circles, one must offer more than common merchandise to draw the attention of discerning clients. We specialize in goods sought by, shall we say, a more selective clientele. Not exactly contraband, of course, merely items that demand a certain sophistication and willingness to pay." Though he couched it in polite terms, the insinuation sparked curiosity among his audience. Sir Laurent arched an eyebrow. Lady Avellini glanced at Donovan with a mixture of intrigue and concern. She had heard whispers before about the Harding Clark's sharp practices, their occasional forays into morally gray transactions. Donovan, noticing her subtle apprehension, smoothly redirected the conversation. "But enough of commerce. How do you find Grey Castle thus far, Sir Laurent? The architecture alone is worth the journey." The ambassador offered a diplomatic smile, drawn in by Donovan's easy charm. "Exquisite, my lord. Your city is indeed a marvel of design, and the hospitality has been most gracious." Donovan, feeling triumphant at having maneuvered away from scrutiny, shared a knowing glance with his two sycophantic companions who had trailed him into the gathering. In truth, he was growing bored. He craved an opportunity to seize the spotlight even more dramatically, something that would elevate his name above the scores of other nobles, some of whom had genealogies reaching back centuries. What better way to prove he belonged among them than an ostentatious display of authority? As if fate were orchestrating his moment, the great reception hall's grand double doors swung open, revealing a swirl of activity outside. Captain Whitehall reappeared, along with Winston and a few more Ruby Sentinels, standing at attention while more guests filed in. No trouble was brewing, but Donovan saw Winston's arrival as an opportunity. His cunning mind quickly devised a scene that would highlight Winston's subordinate role and Donovan's own perceived superiority. Feigning a friendly tone, Donovan stepped away from Lady Avellini and approached Winston. "Good Sentinel," he called out, beckoning Winston to the center of the hall. "Why not partake in this gathering for a moment and demonstrate for our foreign friends how our palace guards greet their superiors?" It was said with a theatrical flourish, as though Winston were a court jester there to entertain. The invitation was laced with an unspoken challenge. A ripple of tension flitted through those present. Captain Whitehall's jaw tightened, but Winston managed to maintain a measured composure. He advanced a few paces, halting before Donovan with a polite salute. "My duty is to keep watch, my lord. I am not at liberty to partake in feasts or formalities while on duty." Donovan clapped his hands in a mocking show of delight. "Oh, how very dedicated. But do demonstrate a salute or two, so our dear guests can see the discipline for which Grey Castle's guardians are so revered." His eyes drifted meaningfully toward Sir Laurent and a few other foreign visitors, ensuring they were all watching. Winston, caught in the glare of the assembled crowd, offered the standard salute of the Ruby Sentinels. It was a crisp movement, a hand lifted smartly to the brow, chest squared, feet aligned, a testament to the unit's proud tradition. Those who recognized it nodded in quiet approval. Yet Donovan pressed further. "Is that all?" he asked with feigned innocence. "I've heard tales of a more elaborate salute. Have you none for the occasion, perhaps something more regal for a high-born audience? Or do they only teach you the basics these days?" Laughter bubbled from his companions, and a few onlookers squirmed in discomfort. It was a moment orchestrated to make Winston look inadequate. Winston felt a keen sting of indignation. He had trained tirelessly to represent the palace, to maintain composure under all circumstances, but Donovan's performance threatened to reduce that honor to a sideshow. Winston lowered his arm, carefully avoiding a challenging expression that might breach protocol. "We adhere to tradition, my lord. We do not incorporate elaborate displays where they are unneeded. Our purpose is security, not spectacle." Donovan gave a languid shrug and turned to the audience. "There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a guard so devoted that he has forgotten the finer arts of presentation. Perhaps that speaks to Grey Castle's growing acceptance of mediocrity, or perhaps they simply prefer the unembellished." He flashed a condescending smile. "How very utilitarian." Silence settled over the hall, broken only by the scrape of boots on the polished floors as guards shifted uneasily, uncertain whether to intervene. Sir Laurent looked away, evidently uncomfortable. Lady Avellini pressed her lips together, disapproval etched on her features. Captain Whitehall seemed on the verge of stepping in, but Winston faced Donovan directly. Winston spoke, voice carrying a quiet strength. "Guarding these halls is not for show, my lord. If you find it lacking in presentation, I can only suggest that the Ruby Sentinels value the safety of our guests above pageantry." A faint hush rippled through the hall. Donovan's eyes flashed. No one dared laugh or applaud. Winston's words were neither insolent nor subservient. They simply asserted the dignity of the guard station with polite resolve. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though Donovan might lash out more forcefully. Then, aware that further aggression would make him look small, Donovan turned away with a derisive scoff. He moved to a side table of refreshments, snapping his fingers for an attendant to replenish his wine. The guests, uncertain how to proceed, resumed subdued conversations in scattered pockets. Captain Whitehall caught Winston's eye in passing, a barely perceptible nod suggesting Winston had handled himself appropriately. Winston returned to his station, forcibly steadying his breath. Deep down, he wrestled with frustration and a sense of injustice, yet he reminded himself that his vow demanded patience, no matter how badly another might behave. As the evening wore on, Donovan made sure to position himself as the center of attention, regaling small groups with stories about his supposed exploits, name-dropping influential people from different cities, and teasing future deals that might enrich any lords willing to partner with him. Some listened avidly, seduced by the glimmer of profit or the novelty of hearing about commerce from far-flung places. Others politely endured his posturing, privately wishing the evening would end. Eventually, the great reception hall emptied out as the foreign guests retired to their quarters and local nobles drifted away to their private salons or waiting carriages. Not one to let the day pass without more mischief, Donovan exited into the courtyard, where a light drizzle still fell. Winston was stationed near the main gate again, conversing quietly with two other guards as they debriefed about the event's security. Donovan approached, his expression unreadable beneath the dim lantern light. "Guard," he said in a low voice, "I've a matter that requires your immediate attention. Follow me." When Winston's fellow sentinels began to join him, Donovan raised a staying hand. "No need for all of you. One guard is sufficient for what I have in mind." Something in Donovan's tone made Winston's instincts flare with caution. But ever dutiful, Winston nodded to the others. "Carry on. I'll rejoin you shortly." Then he turned to Donovan, who strode away from a gate and across the slick courtyard, heading toward a quieter section of the palace grounds. The path led them through a covered arcade adorned with creeping ivy and climbing roses. The only sound was the soft patter of raindrops on the stone archways. Finally, Donovan came to a halt, leaning against a carved pillar. He stared at Winston, an unsettling glint in his eyes. "Listen closely, guard," Donovan began, his voice cold. "You are becoming an irritant. Twice now, you've dared to speak to me in a manner I find unacceptable." Winston tensed. The memory of Donovan's earlier ridicule lingered in his mind, but he stood firm. "I've done only what my duties require, my lord." Donovan gave a hollow laugh. "Yes, your duties," he echoed in a mocking tone. "But must you be so rigid, so pedantic, so eager to show me up? Because that's how it feels, like you're taunting me with your stoic face and your refusal to bend." The low flicker of lantern light caught on the silver embroidery of Donovan's coat, enhancing the sense of threat emanating from him. "There's no personal slight intended," Winston replied calmly, though his pulse quickened. "My vow is to uphold the palace's guidelines, not to appease personal grudges." Donovan's gaze narrowed. "Your vow," he muttered with contempt. "Here's what I propose. Reconsider how you address me, how you treat me, or I might just have a quiet word with those in charge about your competence, or lack thereof. We both know how easily reputations can be destroyed, especially for those without powerful family names." He paused, letting the threat settle in the air. Winston said nothing, his silence an attempt to maintain composure. Donovan pressed on, voice growing sharper. "Tell me, how does a man of your station plan to feed his family if he's cast out from Ruby Sentinels? The city teems with beggars who once served in lesser regiments. Wouldn't you prefer to remain gainfully employed, avoid any ugly rumors about insubordination? I am, after all, quite persuasive. Doors open for me, or slam shut on those who provoke me." Winston locked eyes with Donovan, searching for any hint of uncertainty. He found none. Donovan spoke as someone who believed wholeheartedly in his own impunity. The guard took a measured breath, summoning an even tone. "My loyalty is to the crown and the city. I cannot compromise that oath for one man's demands, no matter his status." Donovan's lips pressed into a thin line, the drizzle collecting on his hair and shoulders, making him look like a vengeful specter in the gloom. "I was hoping you'd be more reasonable. But so be it. You've chosen defiance. Don't say you weren't warned." Without another word, Donovan pivoted and walked back toward the palace's main archway, leaving Winston standing in a half-light, the sound of rainfall and the ghostly echoes of the courtyard settling around him. A hollow feeling churned in Winston's stomach. He had faced threats before from petty criminals or drunken troublemakers, but this was different. Donovan held real influence, and his thirst for revenge felt dangerously personal. The following days in Grey Castle were weighed down by a heavy sense of anticipation, as though everyone sensed a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Donovan continued attending posh events, but his attention seemed elsewhere. Occasionally, glimpses of him stalking the palace corridors with an air of plotting readiness emerged in hushed conversations. Some among Grey Castle's elite wondered if Donovan might attempt to manipulate certain high-born courtiers into supporting an accusation against Winston, or if he was simply biding his time for a more direct approach. Winston refused to succumb to intimidation, maintaining his usual diligence and performing his duties with the same calm resolve he had always shown. Despite his efforts, a creeping tension in the ranks became evident. A handful of Donovan's new associates, newly emboldened by the young noble's bravado, began to drop comments near other guards, suggestions that Winston was overstepping his role, that perhaps the Ruby Sentinels should be reorganized for efficiency, or that Winston himself was too stiff to belong among more refined aristocracy. It was all subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation, yet insidious in its erosion of Winston's standing. But Winston was not entirely without allies. Captain Whitehall had observed Donovan's hostilities from the start and, though constrained by palace etiquette, maintained a protective watch. Lady Avellini Renford, deeply respected in philanthropic circles, had discreetly expressed support for Winston, praising his impeccable sense of duty. Even some among Donovan's coterie seemed uncomfortable with the level of malice emanating from their benefactor. Yet no one challenged Donovan openly. His father's distant but formidable reputation served as a shield, and many in Grey Castle preferred not to make an enemy of such a wealthy, well-connected family. All the while, Winston could do little but brace himself. He had an ominous feeling that Donovan's thirst for revenge would escalate into something more destructive. He would soon discover just how far Donovan was willing to go to defend his misplaced pride. At length, an announcement was made that Grey Castle would host a grand festival in honor of the approaching equinox, a time when the city's citizens would gather to celebrate changing seasons with dancing, feasting, and splendid pageantry. Nobles opened their homes to banquets, minstrels performed in the streets, and the palace prepared an extensive program, culminating in a magnificent ball. Foreign dignitaries still present in the city were invited to partake, and excitement rippled through every district. The festival promised a lavish display of Grey Castle's cultural vitality, but it also offered a stage on which Donovan might launch whatever scheme he had been quietly nurturing. On the eve of the festival's commencement, Winston conducted his usual inspection of the palace courtyard. Lanterns strung overhead cast a warm glow, illuminating rows of newly planted flower arrangements meant to impress the city's guests. Stalls were being erected where local artisans would sell their jewelry, paintings, or handcrafted curios. Chefs and their aides scurried back and forth, transporting crates of fresh produce destined for the festival banquet. The air bristled with expectancy. As Winston passed beneath a row of ornamental flags, he sensed movement in the shadows. He tensed, one hand drifting to the hilt of his short sword, a standard sidearm for the Ruby Sentinels. Then a figure emerged, Donovan's ever-faithful footman. The man was gray-haired and slight, constantly wearing an expression of mild anxiety, as though the stress of serving Donovan's caprices took a daily toll on him. "You are Winston Waterford, are you not?" the footman asked, glancing over his shoulder nervously. Winston inclined his head. "I am. Why do you ask?" The footman swallowed. "My Lord Donovan summons you to his temporary suite at the Hightree Guest Manor this very night. He insists it is of utmost importance." Winston felt a trickle of dread. "I'm on duty. I cannot simply leave my post for a casual summons." The footman exhaled shakily. "My lord insisted that if you refuse, he will report your lack of cooperation to higher authorities. He claims it's a matter concerning the festival's security and that it cannot wait." The man's eyes flicked around as though half expecting Donovan to materialize beside him at any second. "He asked me to relay that if you do not come, the consequences will be dire." Though Winston bristled at the threat, he also recognized the cunning behind it. A claim of security concerns could force Winston's involvement, or at least implicate him if he ignored it. Softly cursing the predicament, Winston relayed the matter to a fellow guard and stepped away to confer with Captain Whitehall. The captain listened grimly, then placed a hand on Winston's shoulder in a rare gesture of camaraderie. "It seems Donovan's pressing you into a corner," Whitehall said. "Go to him, hear what he has to say. I'll ensure we have enough coverage here at the palace. But be wary. Whatever he's planning, it's unlikely to be straightforward." Winston nodded, heart weighed by apprehension. He set out for Hightree Guest Manor, a short walk from the palace. Though overshadowed by the palace's grandeur, the manor was hardly modest. Its facade boasted tall windows framed by carved columns, and a manicured garden out front showcased a striking fountain sculpted in the shape of twisting vines. An attendant greeted Winston with icy politeness and ushered him to an ornate sitting room. The space was lit by flickering candelabras, their flames dancing across gold-accented wallpaper. Plush chairs draped in velvet surrounded a central table bearing a decanter of expensive brandy. Donovan reclined in one of the chairs, swirling a glass of the liquor. He offered Winston an insincere smile as the guard entered. "Ah, he arrives," Donovan drawled, gesturing for the attendant to depart. The door closed with a hushed click, leaving the two men alone, the tension almost tangible. Donovan motioned toward a chair opposite him. "Sit, guard, unless your sense of discipline forbids you from doing so in my presence." Winston remained standing. "You summoned me under the pretext of a security matter, my lord. Might I learn what it is you wish to discuss?" Donovan raised an amused eyebrow at Winston's straightforward tone. "Very well," he said, sipping his brandy. "I'm worried, you see, that the upcoming festival might attract unsavory elements, thieves, saboteurs, who knows? The city will be awash with travelers, strangers. I thought it prudent to arrange some private protection for myself." Winston frowned. "You can request private security through official channels. The Crown authorizes licensed protective services for visiting nobility. Why summon me personally?" Donovan's lips formed a thin smile. "Because I want the best," he declared with feigned magnanimity. "You, Winston Waterford, are reputed to be one of the palace's most capable guards, despite your stubborn demeanor. I'd like to retain your services for the duration of the festival. Guard me, shadow me. Ensure no harm befalls me or the deals I intend to make. And in return, I shall reward you handsomely. The sheer audacity of the proposition struck Winston like a blow. Donovan, a figure who had repeatedly belittled and threatened him, was now asking him to act as a personal bodyguard. It felt less like an offer and more like another manipulative scheme. He straightened his shoulders. My station is with the Ruby Sentinels, sworn to protect the palace and its guests as a whole. I cannot offer exclusive protection to a single individual unless the Crown issues such an order. Donovan feigned forlorn sigh. Must you be so singularly bound by protocol? This is a chance to earn significant coin. I can make it worth your while, far more than your paltry soldier's wage. He watched Winston carefully, searching for any flicker of temptation in the guard's eyes. Winston was unmoved, gaze fixed on Donovan with calm fortitude. My oath is to serve the Crown impartially, he repeated. I will not abandon my duties to guard only one man. For a moment, Donovan's face hardened with anger. Then, with an eerie smoothness, he set his glass down and leaned forward. Do you know, he said in a low, clipped tone, what I could do to your reputation if I told the right people that you refused to address a credible security threat? What if I told them you neglected your responsibilities, endangering a noble who specifically asked for help? Are you certain your so-called oath can shield you from the scandal that might ensue? Winston felt his pulse quicken, but showed no outward fear. I follow the chain of command, my lord. If you have concerns, address them to the captain or to the Crown's liaison. If they deem I should protect you exclusively, I shall obey. Donovan's carefully measured facade started to crack. His eyes flashed with malice. So that's your game? Hiding behind the chain of command? Perhaps you think your unimpeachable loyalty will save you, no matter the cost. He sprang from his chair and paced the floor with restless energy. Let me be clear, I will not be made a fool of by a guard. If you insist on refusing me, I'll have no choice but to secure your downfall another way. Winston braced himself, refusing to rise to the bait. Do what you must, my lord. I will continue to act in accordance with my duty. Donovan stared at him, struggling to quell the ferocity coursing through him. Then, in an abrupt shift, he forced a dismissive wave of the hand. Leave me, he snapped. I tire of this conversation. But remember my words, Winston Waterford. You will regret your obstinacy. Winston departed without a backward glance, aware that Donovan's patience was nearly at an end. The night air outside felt charged with foreboding as he made his way back to the palace, replaying the tense exchange in his mind. He reported the incident to Captain Whitehall, who swore he would keep an even closer watch on Donovan's activities. Yet both men knew that Donovan's wealth and influence granted him the ability to orchestrate a scheme from behind the scenes, no matter how vigilant they remained. When the festival began the following morning, Grey Castle was transformed into a tapestry of joyous sights and sounds. Streamers in bright hues draped across rooftops, street performers juggled flaming torches, and costumed actors reenacted famous legends in public squares. Music floated from every corner, lutes, flutes, and drums weaving a lively backdrop for the throngs of citizens and visitors alike. Stall after stall offered pastries, spiced ciders, spun sugar, and other indulgences rarely seen outside of special occasions. Throughout the day, Winston moved among the crowds, helping maintain order and ensuring that pickpockets or unruly revelers did not spoil the festivities. He found himself scanning every face, every alley, half expecting Donovan to unveil some cunning maneuver. Yet Donovan remained elusive, neither making a grand entrance nor skulking on the sidelines. By mid-afternoon, Winston had begun to wonder whether Donovan might have heeded caution and chosen a more subtle path. But deep down, he suspected that Donovan's ego would demand a theatrical unveiling of vengeance. As dusk fell, torches and lanterns bathed the streets in a golden glow. The city's heartbeat quickened. Music grew louder, dancing spilled into the open squares, and couples in elaborate finery glided across makeshift ballrooms. In the palace itself, the culminating ball was about to begin. Invitations had been sent to nobles, high-ranking merchants, foreign dignitaries, and notable figures of Grey Castle's society. Captain Whitehall had assigned Winston to oversee the main entrance, verifying invitations and ensuring that no unauthorized persons slipped inside. Then, as carriages trundled up the drive, Winston spotted a sight he had braced himself for: Donovan Harding-Clark, stepping gracefully from a dazzling carriage drawn by four immaculate white horses. He wore an ensemble so decadent it bordered on theatrical: midnight blue velvet trimmed with gold braiding, a cloak lined with fur, and a jeweled brooch glinting on his chest. A ring of onlookers parted, some gawking at the display, others unsettled by the faint aura of menace that seemed to cling to him. Winston greeted him with the same professional calm he offered every guest, extending a hand for his invitation. Donovan produced the parchment with a self-satisfied smirk. "This time, I trust everything is in order," he purred. Winston examined the document. "It is legitimate, my lord," he affirmed. "Welcome to the palace ball." Donovan offered a theatrical bow. "I knew you'd see reason eventually," he said in a stage whisper meant only for Winston. Then he straightened, that smirk still in place. "Do enjoy the evening, guard. I suspect it may hold a surprise or two." With that, he swept inside, leaving Winston with an uneasy sense of a phrase, a surprise or two. Winston alerted Captain Whitehall to Donovan's arrival, and the captain nodded grimly, stationing extra guards throughout the corridors. The ball had to proceed, but both men were on high alert. Inside the palace's grand ballroom, the atmosphere was enchanting. Soft candlelight glowed from chandeliers, sending flickers of illumination skittering over the polished floors. Musicians played a lively tune from a dais. Lords and ladies, dressed in their finest silks, mingled and moved through graceful dances. Laughter and clinking goblets reverberated off the high-domed ceiling. Decorative floral arrangements scented the air with hints of rose and lily. Donovan sauntered through the crowd, eyes scouring the room for potential allies or victims. Sycophants who had latched onto him during his stay in Grey Castle flocked around, exchanging pleasantries and praising his extraordinary taste in attire. He acknowledged them with perfunctory nods, but his gaze wandered, searching for a stage to enact his next move. A cunning expression crossed his features when he noticed a group of foreign dignitaries speaking with Lady Aveline Renford and a few high-ranking members of Grey Castle's court. Perfect, he thought, his steps carrying him in their direction. "Good evening," he said pleasantly upon reaching the group. "I trust you're finding the city's festivities to your liking." He nodded politely to each person. Though his eyes lingered an extra second on Lady Aveline, he recalled that she had witnessed his earlier confrontation with Winston. He wondered whether she might be more sympathetic to Winston's plight than he could tolerate. Lady Aveline offered a measured smile. "Grey Castle never fails to charm its guests, my lord, and tonight's ball is no exception." A foreign diplomat stepped forward, greeting Donovan warmly. "A splendid occasion indeed, Lord Harding-Clark. We've heard much about the city's security reforms. That guard regiment of yours is quite impressive." Donovan seized the remark. "They do try their best, though I do wonder if some of their recruits might be better suited to simpler tasks," he said with a pointed arch and eyebrow. The insinuation hung heavy in the air, and some in the group shifted uncomfortably. Lady Aveline decided not to let it pass unremarked. "Our guards are quite competent and dedicated, my lord. I've personally observed many examples of their heroism." Donovan offered a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I'm sure a few of them are exemplary," he allowed, as though dispensing a small mercy. "But on occasion one encounters an individual who lacks the courtesy or judgment expected of palace personnel. Such a shame, really. It reflects poorly on the entire city." Lady Aveline's posture grew resolute. She appeared to weigh whether to confront Donovan head-on. Ultimately, she chose diplomacy, responding only with a neutral, "We must remember that men who stand guard do so under great pressure and risk. They deserve our respect for preserving safety, do they not?" The tension that hovered around her words wasn't lost on Donovan. He gave a cool, dismissive nod, as though too lofty to be annoyed. "Of course, my lady. Respect is crucial in all forms. In fact, I hold deep respect for those who know their place and carry out their roles with minimal fuss." If he expected Lady Aveline to retort, she did not. Instead, she signaled to a waiting attendant, feigning a sudden desire to lead the foreign diplomat to the refreshment table, thus extricating herself from Donovan's presence. Left without his intended sparring partner, Donovan's eyes narrowed. He excused himself from the circle and wandered deeper into the throng, mentally rehearsing the next step of whatever plan he had conceived. As the evening advanced, dances gave way to a series of performances. Acrobats showcased their flexibility, minstrels entertained with ballads of Greycastle's storied heroes, and jugglers in bright costumes elicited gasps from the audience. Applause filled the ballroom, merging with the swirl of chatter. Winston, posted at one end of the long corridor leading to the ballroom, stood with unwavering focus, scanning every face that passed. Eventually, Captain Whitehall approached him, leaning in to speak discreetly. He's been prowling the ballroom, engaging different clusters of guests. Nothing overtly suspicious yet. Winston gave a small nod, his gaze never wavering from the passing crowd. He threatened surprises, but so far no sign. I'll keep watch here. Then, out of the crowd, a young palace steward dashed toward them, breathless. Captain, guard Waterford, there's an incident in the West Gallery. Lord Harding-Clark is accusing one of our staff of theft. Winston and the captain exchanged looks that spoke volumes. Accusing staff of theft. Whitehall repeated, "This is it then. Let's go." They followed the steward through a series of connecting corridors until they reached a dimly lit gallery where paintings of Greycastle's monarchs adorned the walls. A gathering had formed near the far end. Donovan stood at the center, face a mask of outrage, gesturing at a trembling page boy who wore the palace livery. Several curious onlookers hovered nearby, including Lady Avellini, a foreign dignitary, and two more guards from Ruby Sentinels. The hush was tense, as though everyone awaited an explosion. "There you are." Donovan shouted the moment he spotted Winston and Captain Whitehall. "I demand justice. This boy," he pointed a shaking finger at the page, "stole a valuable ring from my personal belongings. I caught him sneaking away with it. Check his pockets if you doubt me." The page, no older than 14, looked near tears. He pleaded his innocence in a quavering voice. "I didn't take anything, my lord. I only came in to extinguish the lanterns as instructed." Donovan stepped forward, looming over the terrified page. "Lies," he hissed. "I saw you skulking about my cloak. Where is the ring?" The page fumbled, turning out his pockets. They contained only a small rag and a coin or two. "No ring." The onlookers murmured uncertainly. Donovan, undeterred, faced Winston and Whitehall. "He must have dropped it when he heard me coming. We need to search the area." Captain Whitehall gave a curt nod to Winston. They split up, scanning the gallery floor for any sign of the alleged ring. The other guards followed suit, keeping an eye on the page and Donovan. Within a minute, Winston spotted a faint gleam near the corner of a table, behind a draped curtain. Stooping, he picked up what appeared to be a signet ring set with a gleaming blue stone. He raised it for all to see. Donovan clicked his tongue in triumph. "There. Proof." He tried to hide it. "Now, do your duty and arrest him." The page began to sob, his voice trembling. "I swear I never touched it. I've never even seen that ring before now." Whitehall stepped in, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he said quietly. Then, in a louder voice, he directed the other guards to keep the gallery locked down. Meanwhile, Winston studied Donovan's face, noting the smug satisfaction that played about his features. It was too neat, too convenient. Donovan had orchestrated a scenario in which staff could be accused with minimal effort. Lady Avellini approached, expression creased with concern. "My Lord Harding-Clark, are you certain you saw the boy with your ring?" Donovan bristled. "I know what I saw, my lady. Why would I fabricate such a serious accusation?" A hush befell the room. Winston ventured a measured step forward, ring in hand. "My lord, would you mind describing the ring's inscription? Most signet rings bear a family crest or motto. We should confirm it's indeed yours." Donovan cast Winston a scathing look, but he covered it swiftly with a cool smile. "It's a Harding-Clark heirloom, our family crest, a hawk clutching an arrow, with the words Audacia Vincit etched inside the band." Winston peered closely at the ring under the lantern light. Sure enough, the hawk and arrow were present, along with the Latin phrase. He could find no immediate discrepancy. Donovan took the ring from Winston, turning it theatrically in his fingers. Captain Whitehall motioned to the page. "We'll have to question you in private, lad. If you're innocent, we'll do everything to prove it. But at the moment, we must follow procedure." The boy was gently escorted away by two guards, tears still shining in his eyes. Donovan feigned a sympathetic nod. A pity he didn't think twice about succumbing to temptation. A valuable lesson for him. He then lifted his gaze, scanning the watchers until his eyes settled on Winston. His lips curved into a small grin that only Winston seemed to notice. The city is riddled with petty thieves, is it not, Gar Waterford? I warned you about ensuring my possessions were safe. The gall of that statement made Winston's pulse pound. We can't be everywhere at once, my lord, he replied carefully. But I assure you, if the page is guilty, he will be dealt with fairly. Donovan shrugged. Yes, fairly indeed. With that, he brushed past Winston and Captain Whitehall, rejoining the lively festival. The assembled onlookers soon dispersed, leaving Lady Avellini and the guards to grapple with the uneasy aftermath. For the next hour, Winston assisted Whitehall in examining the scene more thoroughly. A thorough sweep of the gallery turned up no hint that the page had tampered with any personal belongings. The page, thoroughly shaken, maintained his innocence. He was too young and inexperienced in deception to spin a sophisticated lie. Something about the entire tableau reeked of a setup, reminiscent of Donovan's earlier threats. Yet the ring, found precisely where Donovan had said, supported his story. The question was how to prove otherwise. Word of the alleged theft, albeit quickly contained, spread among the palace staff. Whispers circulated that Donovan might be fabricating an incident to undermine the staff's credibility. Some recalled Winston's earlier clash with Donovan, speculating that the noble might be laying groundwork for an even larger accusation. Others suspected Donovan might be engaged in a twisted game, testing how far he could twist the city's laws to his advantage. Either way, morale sank, and Winston felt the burden of guilt. If Donovan was manipulating events, it was Winston's refusal to bend to Donovan's demands that had triggered the fiasco. Night deepened, and the festival revelry continued in other sections of the palace. Winston finished his shift and retreated to the guards' quarters, heavy with the knowledge that the page might now face punishment for a crime he almost certainly did not commit. Perhaps the boy would be exonerated in a formal inquiry, but Donovan's influence made that outcome precarious. Winston paced the small room he shared with another guard, his mind racing. He couldn't stand aside while an innocent youth was framed. Yet confronting Donovan without evidence was an invitation to further ruin. He needed concrete proof of Donovan's deceit. But how? At last, Winston resolved that he'd have to catch Donovan in the act. Something told him the alleged theft was but a preliminary strike, a test of how easily Donovan could manipulate palace protocols. If Donovan felt emboldened, he might attempt something bolder and more audacious, a move so large it would forever tarnish Winston's name or harm the palace's reputation. The only way to end Donovan's vendetta was to anticipate his next step, gather undeniable evidence, and bring it to the attention of an authority who could not be swayed by bribes or intimidation. Sunlight of the next morning broke over Grey Castle, finding Winston more determined than ever. He shared his suspicions with Captain Whitehall, who admitted he too believed Donovan had orchestrated the scenario with the ring. They needed more than suspicion to act, however. Whitehall recommended Winston monitor Donovan discreetly, while the captain covered the official side of things, ensuring the page's hearing was as unbiased as possible. The Ruby Sentinels might not be all-powerful, but they had to stand for truth. So Winston shadowed Donovan from a distance, making sure never to draw attention to himself. He watched as Donovan fraternized with certain city merchants known for operating at the edges of legality, observed him exchanging hushed words with a handful of local lesser nobles whose fortunes had dipped, and noted which courtiers seemed overly eager to earn Donovan's esteem. Each day Winston gleaned small hints, talk of a major deal Donovan hoped to close, references to a massive opportunity that would overshadow the entire festival, cryptic mentions of official documents that Donovan apparently sought from palace records. Bit by bit, Winston began to piece together the shape of a sinister plan, though its full scope remained elusive. Then, late one evening, Winston caught sight of Donovan heading into a seldom-used corridor near the palace archives. The archives stored centuries of ledgers, treaties, and royal decrees. Few, besides scholars or authorized staff, had any reason to linger there. Intrigued, Winston followed at a cautious distance, weaving through the gloom of torchlit passages. He arrived at the corridors, and just in time to see Donovan stepping through a side door. Winston stilled his breath, inching close enough to hear voices. Donovan was speaking in a hushed tone to someone. Winston couldn't see who, but he recognized the quivering reply. It was the same footman who had summoned Winston to Hightree Guest Manor nights before. Straining his ears, Winston discerned fragments of the conversation, references to a ledger, the phrase shipping routes, something about discrediting any guard who stands in my way. The footman sounded frightened, apologizing repeatedly and stammering, "I'll do exactly as you say, my lord." Winston's pulse pounded. This was the break he needed, a direct link between Donovan's shady dealings and his intent to sabotage the integrity of the palace. If only Winston could glean more detail. Carefully, he pressed against the door, hoping to overhear specifics that might help him prove Donovan's treachery. But the door creaked, betraying his presence. Inside, Donovan's voice snapped to attention. Footsteps thundered toward the threshold. Winston had no choice but to retreat swiftly down the corridor, concealing himself behind a wide column. Moments later, the door swung open, and Donovan stepped out, eyes scanning the corridor with suspicion. The footman hovered behind him, pale and anxious. Seeing no one, Donovan let out a soft curse, told the footman to follow, and strode away in the opposite direction. Winston exhaled in relief, but he knew Donovan's wariness would now be heightened. Determined not to waste the chance, Winston slipped into the side room. He found it empty, lined with shelves crammed with old records. By the faint light from a single-wall lantern, he examined the ledgers spread on a table. They listed shipping routes indeed, dates, destinations, and goods, some of which seemed to correspond with the foreign markets Donovan's family allegedly dominated. Winston couldn't interpret all the codes scrawled in the margins, but he sensed the data was valuable. If Donovan were leveraging these official records for personal gain or forging them to manipulate trade deals, that alone was a crime. Coupled with his campaign of intimidation, it hinted at something even more nefarious. Winston gently closed the ledgers and made a mental note of their reference numbers. He left everything as he had found it, retreating from the archives before anyone else arrived. His mind whirled with the knowledge that Donovan was forging alliances with unscrupulous courtiers and meddling with official records, presumably to secure a fortune or blackmail those who stood in his way. Winston's own predicament felt all the more precarious. Donovan's vow to destroy him if he did not comply was likely just a piece of the puzzle. Time was running short. Winston feared that once Donovan finalized his manipulations, he would drop any pretense of civility and crush anyone who threatened to expose him, Winston included. The page boy's frame-up was an early test, and Donovan had proven adept at weaponizing the system. Winston needed a decisive blow that would reveal Donovan's treachery before the noble could vanish with his ill-gotten gains or escalate to more dire tactics. Once again, Winston turned to Captain Whitehall, divulging what he had overheard. The captain listened, face set in grim lines. If Donovan is altering shipping records or forging official documents for personal profit, that's a severe offense against the crown, Whitehall murmured. But we need undeniable proof. Right now, it's circumstantial. We must catch him red-handed or acquire a witness with the courage to testify. Winston thought of the frightened footman. That man might talk if he felt safe, but Donovan's threats probably keep him in line. Is there a way we can protect him, perhaps persuade him to confide in us? Whitehall's jaw tightened. We can try, but Donovan's watchers are everywhere. The man might fear for his life if he betrays Donovan. He paused, then added in a lower tone, there's a possibility we can encourage Lady Avellini or a similarly respected figure to mediate, but we need compelling evidence first. In the days that followed, Winston watched Donovan more closely than ever, scanning the man's every move for signs of duplicity. Donovan, for his part, seemed brazenly confident. He no longer bothered to hide his associations with shady merchants. The festival was nearing its conclusion, and soon the city would return to normalcy, but Winston suspected Donovan intended to finalize his grand scheme before leaving Grey Castle behind. If Winston failed to intercept it, Donovan would vanish, and the boy framed for theft might never be cleared, while Donovan's probable blackmail or manipulated trades would yield enormous profit, further entrenching his power. Finally, the night arrived for the festival's closing ceremony, a lavish banquet in the palace's largest courtyard, complete with fireworks and a stately procession of Grey Castle's highest nobility. Winston was assigned to supervise the perimeter, ensuring no uninvited guests infiltrated the gala. As he oversaw the setup of torch stands and decorative banners, he caught sight of Donovan striding purposefully across the courtyard in conversation with an older man wearing the robes of a minor court official. Their hushed conversation looked intense. Winston took note of the official's face, recognizing him as one who occasionally worked in the archives. A pang of apprehension twisted in Winston's gut. Donovan was likely finalizing the last piece of whatever infiltration or theft he had plotted. When the banquet began, Winston circled the courtyard, scanning for any anomaly. The fireworks soared overhead in bursts of vivid color, momentarily lighting the night sky. Laughter and clinking glasses resonated from banquet tables laden with golden plates of roasted meats, spiced vegetables, and honeyed pastries. Musicians stationed near the fountain played cheerful melodies, while couples twirled in dance. Even amid the festivities, Winston's senses were taut like a drawn bowstring. Sure enough, near the banquet's midpoint, Winston glimpsed Donovan slipping away from the tables, leaving behind the swirl of dancing nobles. Winston followed discreetly, staying just far enough behind to avoid detection. Donovan weaved through a side corridor, eventually descending a narrow staircase that led to the palace's lower levels. Winston recalled that the archives and many lesser-known storerooms were located in that subterranean realm. Heart-pounding, Winston pressed forward. The corridor's torches cast wavering shadows on the stone walls. Voices floated from somewhere ahead, echoing faintly off the damp stone. Winston edged nearer. Two silhouettes appeared at the end of the corridor, partially illuminated by a torch sconce. Donovan stood with the older court official Winston had seen earlier, and to Winston's surprise, the footman was there, pale-faced and trembling. Spread between them on a small table were documents, likely official records or trade ledgers. Donovan's voice hissed with urgency. "Verifying these stamps and forging the rest," he said, flicking through pages. "This will ensure the shipping routes are redirected as I see fit. Our partners in the East will flood the markets, while certain Grey Castle suppliers find themselves suddenly in arrears. A perfect realignment. I'll reap a fortune, and those who oppose me will be left scrounging for scraps." The official nodded, sweat beading on his brow. "Why, yes, my lord, but we must be quick. If anyone notices these records replaced, it'll raise alarm." Donovan scoffed. "We'll be long gone by then, with enough leverage to silence any inquisitors. Besides, I have a scapegoat lined up. If all goes as planned, certain meddling guards will take the blame for security lapses, plus that unfortunate page who nearly wrecked my ring. My father will ensure the crown's attention is diverted elsewhere." The footman looked as though he might faint. He forced out a whisper. "My lord, might we keep this quiet?" I don't want trouble with the guards." Donovan snorted. "You'll do as you're told, or the guards will be the least of your worries. Now shut up and help me with this wax seal." He spun the signet ring on his finger, a different ring from the one that had been stolen. This one bore the official stamp needed to authorize changes in the registry. Donovan's father was evidently high enough in station to possess such a mark, or Donovan had acquired it illicitly. Either way, its presence was a damning revelation. Winston's adrenaline surged. At last, concrete evidence. Donovan was forging official documents for personal gain, threatening the footman, implicating an innocent page, and planning to pin blame on Winston. He needed to act swiftly, but also carefully, to ensure Donovan didn't destroy the evidence or escape. Winston retraced his steps, hurrying to find Captain Whitehall or any other guard who could help him apprehend Donovan in the act. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, torch flames creating swirling pockets of darkness. He finally emerged into a busier hallway. Spotting two ruby sentinels, Winston rapidly explained the situation. One guard sprinted off to fetch Captain Whitehall, while the other accompanied Winston back to the archives corridor. Together, they descended the staircase. Winston prayed Donovan had already left. He pictured the footman forced to burn the forged documents at Donovan's order, destroying Winston's last chance of proving the noble's guilt. At the corridor's end, Winston heard Donovan's raised voice. "Finish stamping, you idiot, and do it properly. I won't repeat myself." Winston inched closer, the second guard at his side, both braced for confrontation. The moment Donovan came into view, Winston stepped forward, sword at the ready, voice echoing in the vaulted space. "In the name of the crown, cease this at once." Donovan spun around, eyes blazing with fury, the ring seal in hand. The older official froze, and the footman nearly collapsed in fright. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Donovan let out a savage snarl. "You dare intrude on me? You worthless guard." He snatched the half-stamped parchment and made a break for it, trying to charge past Winston to the corridor behind them. Winston blocked him, brandishing his sword in a defensive stance. Donovan, untrained in combat, halted, skidding on the stone floor. The official attempted to sidle away, only to be intercepted by the second guard. The footman fell to his knees, hands over his head. "Please, I'm sorry. I never wanted this," he cried. Donovan's face contorted with rage and desperation. "Do you know who I am? My father will ruin you for this. I'll have you exiled or worse." Winston advanced, calm but unrelenting. "You've broken the law, my lord. Hand over the documents and the ring." Captain Whitehall's voice resounded from behind. He arrived with 2 more guards, effectively trapping Donovan and his accomplices in the narrow corridor. "Donovan Harding Clark," Whitehall pronounced formally, "you are hereby placed under arrest on suspicion of forging official records, conspiracy, and extortion. Surrender now, or face severe consequences." Donovan glared at the encroaching guards. Cornered, he tried one last gambit. He flung the parchment toward a nearby torch, hoping it would ignite and obliterate the evidence. Winston moved swiftly, leaping forward and knocking the parchment aside before it could catch fire, while the second guard lunged to snuff out the torch. Donovan roared with frustration, launching a wild swing at Winston with his bare hands. Winston deflected easily, twisting Donovan's arm behind his back and forcing him to the ground. The older official sank into a corner, hands shaking. The footman, sobbing in relief that Donovan's violent outburst was contained, muttered frantic apologies. Captain Whitehall stooped to retrieve the forged documents, scanning the details with grim satisfaction. "This is more than enough to ensure a full investigation," he said to Winston in a low tone. Donovan writhed under Winston's hold, spitting insults and threats. "You worthless wretch! I will see you all ruined. My father, my entire family's influence." Captain Whitehall signaled for the other guards to bind Donovan's wrists. "We'll see about that," Whitehall said quietly. "Your father is not above the crown, and neither are you." They escorted Donovan up the stairs, a chain of curious palace staff and lingering festival attendees staring in shock at the spectacle. Word spread rapidly through the corridors. Donovan Harding Clark, the arrogant noble who had mocked guards and boasted of grand deals, was being hauled away in manacles, screaming about injustice. Some onlookers found it startling. Others, recalling his previous cruelty, felt a grim satisfaction. As Donovan was marched through the courtyard, Winston maintained a firm grip on his elbow. The crowd parted, uncertain whether to jeer or remain silent. Lady Avellini Renford appeared, eyes wide but resolute, and stepped forward. "Captain Whitehall, is it true you have proof he's been forging records?" Whitehall nodded gravely. "We do. He tried to destroy the evidence, but we arrived in time." Lady Avellini's gaze shifted to Winston, offering a small nod of respect. "You've saved more than just the palace's reputation, guard. You've likely saved innocent people from dire fates." Donovan spat at the ground near Winston's boot. "Enjoy your victory, guard, when my father hears." But Winston refused to be baited. "Your threats hold no power here anymore. You'll face trial for your crimes." A hush fell as the guards led Donovan away to a secure wing of the palace. His associates, the footman and the older official, were escorted separately, presumably to give statements and await their own judgments. Freed from Donovan's clutches, the footman broke down in tears, confessing everything to the captain and promising to testify that Donovan had coerced him from the start. The official, in deeper trouble, could not deny forging documents for Donovan's bribes, but also expressed relief that the scheme had come to light. Both men confirmed that Donovan had plotted to implicate Winston in a fabricated scandal if it became necessary. In the aftermath, Winston's name was cleared beyond question. Captain Whitehall personally commended him for his perseverance and courage under intense pressure. The page boy who had been falsely accused of theft was promptly freed from suspicion, receiving an official apology. As the festival's final day dawned, Grey Castle awoke to the scandalous news that Donovan Harding Clark's arrogance had led to a spectacular downfall. Rumors flew through the markets and tavern halls, each retelling culminating in how Winston Waterford, a steadfast palace guard, had stood his ground and exposed Donovan's criminal ploys. Within the palace, Donovan was detained in a guarded chamber, pending an inquiry by the king's ministers. No matter how many times he invoked his father's name, no immediate rescue was forthcoming. The Crown valued the sanctity of its records and would not abide forgery or blackmail, no matter how well connected the perpetrator. Donovan's father, it was said, had dispatched emissaries in haste, hoping to minimize the damage. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the public nature of Donovan's arrest made secrecy impossible. Days later, in a formal hearing before Grey Castle's council, Donovan's crimes were laid bare. The footman and the official testified in detail, the forged documents were presented, and Winston recounted his confrontation in the archives. With each piece of testimony, Donovan grew paler, realizing the inevitability of his fate. Attempts by his family's representatives to cast doubt on the guards' conduct floundered against the mountain of corroborating evidence. In the end, the council declared Donovan guilty of conspiracy, forgery, extortion, and perjury in connection with the frame-up of the palace page. His father's pleas for leniency were overshadowed by the seriousness of the offenses. The final ruling stripped Donovan of his privileges in Grey Castle and sentenced him to a lengthy house arrest in his native province, with an ominous warning that should he, or his family, attempt to circumvent justice, the crown would respond with harsher punishment. The famed Harding Clark name had been decisively disgraced in the eyes of Grey Castle, if not the entire kingdom. When the official pronouncement was read aloud, Donovan stood trembling, every vestige of his former arrogance replaced by the raw panic of a man who had lost everything. As guards led him away, he passed Winston one final time. Their eyes met. In Donovan's, Winston saw a mix of fury, humiliation, and defeat. In Winston's, Donovan saw quiet resolve. No words were exchanged. News of Donovan's downfall echoed for months throughout noble circles. Some lamented the once glittering potential of an influential new family squandered by a single member's arrogance. Others breathed a sigh of relief that Grey Castle remained governed by fairness rather than bent by bribes. The page boy resumed his duties, more confident now, and regularly nodded gratitude to Winston whenever they crossed paths. Captain Whitehall ensured that Winston's conduct was recognized with an official commendation, though Winston himself accepted it with humble grace, content that justice had prevailed. Within the city, the final twist of the saga became a local legend. A brash noble arrived, mocked a devoted royal guard, and plotted to undermine the entire system through cunning theft and cunning scapegoating, only to be unmasked by the very guard he had scorned. The moral resonated like a timeless cautionary tale. One's wealth and arrogance can be undone by a single resolute act of honesty and courage. And so Grey Castle's streets returned to their usual rhythm. The festival had concluded, leaving behind a swirl of memories, bright fireworks, jubilant music, and a final, explosive scandal that ended in poetic justice. People spoke of Winston Waterford as a symbol of integrity, a guard who refused to bow to tyranny. Whenever carriages rumbled past the palace gates, carrying lords and ladies with lofty airs, the guards on duty would recall Winston's story, reminding each other that no matter how grand the carriage or how pompous its passenger, the honor of the palace lay in unwavering vigilance. As for Winston, he carried on, standing at his post, patrolling corridors, greeting visitors with the same measured courtesy he had always displayed. The city changed around him, alliances came and went, and new faces replaced old at court. But Winston's resolve remained steadfast. No amount of pomp or power could lure him from the oath he took as a ruby sentinel. And whenever the drizzle fell upon the cobblestones, reflecting the glow of lanterns at dusk, Winston would stand guard, recalling the day Donovan Harding Clark arrived in a gilded carriage and believe himself invincible, only to discover the brutal truth that karma respects neither title nor coin, and that justice, once awakened, can be far more formidable than any arrogant noble's threats.